He was just a struggling single father trying to survive each day, until a simple act of kindness toward a stranger changed his destiny forever. David's mornings always began before sunrise, not because he wanted to, but because life didn't give him a choice. The alarm would buzz at 4:30 a.m., and within minutes, he'd be up, quietly preparing breakfast while his little daughter, Lily, slept in the corner of their one-room apartment. The walls were thin, the heater barely worked, and the ceiling leaked whenever it rained. Yet somehow, David still managed to start every day with a tired smile. He'd glance at the photo of his late wife on the table, cracked glass, fading colors, and whisper, "I'm trying. Sarah, I'm trying for her." That was his daily promise. David worked 2 jobs, as a mechanic during the day and a food delivery driver at night. His hands were rough from grease, and his back ached constantly, but he never complained. Every coin mattered. Every minute of rest felt stolen from survival. Still, no matter how hard he worked, it always seemed like life was one step ahead of him, throwing new problems his way. The rent was overdue. Lily's school fee deadline was approaching. And the grocery list on the fridge kept getting shorter, because he was skipping meals so she wouldn't have to. But if there was one thing stronger than David's poverty, it was his love for his daughter. Every evening, no matter how exhausted he was, he'd return home with a smile and say, "Hey, princess, how was school?" Lily would run into his arms, her laughter echoing through the small apartment, filling it with warmth that money could never buy. Sometimes, late at night, when Lily was asleep, David would sit by the window, staring at the streetlights flickering outside. He'd wonder if life would ever get better, if his hard work would ever mean more than just surviving another day. He didn't expect miracles anymore, he just wanted peace. And then one rainy evening, when the world seemed heavier than usual, something unexpected happened, something that would quietly begin to change everything. That night, the city was drowning in rain. The streets glistened under flickering streetlights, and thunder rolled like distant drums. David had just finished his last delivery of the evening, a single pizza that barely earned him enough for a few liters of milk. His jacket was soaked, his stomach empty, and his car's wipers squeaked rhythmically, fighting against the storm. He just wanted to go home, tuck Lily into bed, and forget how hard the day had been. But fate had a different plan. As he drove down an empty road on the outskirts of town, his headlights caught something. A black luxury car pulled over by the side, hazard lights blinking faintly through the rain. Normally, David might have driven past. People with cars like that didn't need help from men like him. But something made him stop. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was empathy. He pulled over and stepped out into the cold rain. The wind bit against his skin as he grabbed his small umbrella and walked toward the car. Inside, a woman sat, struggling with her phone. Her face was lit by the dim glow of the dashboard. She looked frustrated, maybe even scared. David knocked gently on the window. "Mom, are you okay?" The woman startled, then lowered the window slightly. "My car just stopped, and my phone died. I've been waiting here for nearly an hour." No one even slowed down. David nodded, rain dripping from his hair. "Pop the hood," he said simply. She hesitated. "Do you know how to fix it?" He gave a small, reassuring smile. "I'm a mechanic by day, let me try." Without another word, he opened the hood and peered inside. The engine was soaked, a wire disconnected. It wasn't complicated, just messy. For the next 20 minutes he worked silently, his fingers numb from the cold, his clothes soaked through. The woman watched from the car, her expression softening as she realized this stranger, a man with worn shoes and tired eyes, was out here, helping her without a single complaint. When the engine finally roared back to life, David stepped back and smiled faintly. "There you go," he said. "You should be fine now." The woman got out, umbrella trembling in her hands. "Please, let me pay you," she said, reaching into her purse. But David shook his head. "No, Mom, you don't owe me anything. Just drive safe, okay?" She looked at him for a moment, really looked. There was something in his eyes, something pure. "Thank you," she whispered. "You have no idea how much this means." David just smiled and waved it off. "It's nothing," he said, turning to walk back to his old, rusted car. But as she watched him drive away into the rain, something inside her shifted. A quiet curiosity, a spark she couldn't quite explain. Who was this man who helped a stranger in the middle of nowhere, and didn't even want a reward? She didn't know it yet. But this one encounter was about to change both of their lives forever. For the next few days, life returned to its usual rhythm for David. Early mornings, long hours, late nights. The memory of the woman in the rain slowly faded into the background of his tired mind. To him it had been nothing more than a good deed. Just another quiet act of kindness in a world that often forgot what kindness looked like. But somewhere across town, that same woman couldn't stop thinking about him. Her name was Grace Thompson, a name that carried quiet power in the corporate world. She was the CEO of one of the city's most successful automobile companies, though very few knew her personal story. Grace had built her empire from the ground up, but success had come at a cost. Her trust, her warmth, and most of all, her ability to believe in people. For years, she had been surrounded by employees who praised her for her wealth, friends who stayed close only when her name opened doors, and partners who saw her as a trophy rather than a person. The higher she climbed, the lonelier she became. That night, stranded in the rain, she had felt helpless. Not because her car broke down, but because it reminded her that for all her money and status, she had no one to call. And then, out of nowhere, a man who had nothing gave her something no one else had: genuine care. She replayed that moment again and again. The way he smiled despite the rain, how his voice was steady but kind, how he refused her money. It wasn't just rare, it was real. Grace found herself asking her assistant to find out who he was. She didn't know why. Maybe it was curiosity, maybe gratitude, maybe something deeper she couldn't name. It took days, but eventually she had a name and an address: David Miller, a local mechanic who worked 2 jobs, raising a 6-year-old daughter alone. When Grace read that, her heart softened. A single father, struggling yet humble. The kind of person the world rarely notices. She decided not to approach him right away. Instead, she quietly visited the area where he worked. Sitting in her car, watching from afar, she saw how he treated customers with respect, how children from nearby homes waved at him, how he always paused at noon to check a small photo of his daughter before eating a cheap sandwich. He had something she had lost long ago: humanity in its purest form. That evening, as she sat alone in her office with the city skyline glowing beyond the window, Grace whispered to herself, "He helped me without asking for anything. Maybe it's time I do something for him, without telling him who I am." And so, Grace made a decision, one that would soon turn David's simple act of kindness into a life-altering journey. But before she could reveal her intentions, fate was already preparing another test, one that would push David to the edge and show the world what true kindness really means. Life, it seemed, loved testing the ones who least deserved it. For David, the days that followed were some of the hardest he had ever known. One cold morning, as he prepared Lily's breakfast, just toast and a half-empty jar of jam, there was a knock at the door. His landlord stood there, holding an envelope with a forced smile. "David, I'm sorry, but the building's been sold. You've got 2 weeks to move out." The words hit him like a punch to the chest. 2 weeks. He didn't even have enough money to cover next month's rent, let alone find a new place. He tried to reason, to beg for time, but the landlord's eyes were firm and apologetic. There was nothing to be done. That night, after putting Lily to bed, David sat in silence. The city lights flickered through the window, reflecting off the tears he didn't want to shed. He had worked so hard, fought every day just to stay afloat, and yet, life was still pulling him under. But even in his darkest moment, his thoughts weren't for himself. He whispered, "Please, God, just don't let her suffer. I'll figure out the rest." The next day, at the repair shop, David worked with his usual quiet determination. His coworkers joked and complained about their pay, but he stayed focused. When an older customer couldn't afford her car's repair bill, David secretly covered the remaining amount from his own pocket. It wasn't much, just a few dollars, but it was all he could give. Unbeknownst to him, Grace was there that day, sitting quietly in her car across the street. She had been visiting the area often, trying to understand the man who had touched her heart so deeply. When she saw him pay for someone else's repair despite his own struggle, her eyes filled with tears. She realized this was no ordinary man. That evening, David's second job delivering food ran later than usual. The rain had returned, heavier this time, as if the sky itself shared his burden. At one house, he slipped on the wet steps, dropping the bag. The customer yelled, refused to pay, and slammed the door in his face. Soaked, shivering, and hungry, David sat in his car for a long while. the sound of rain drowning out his thoughts. He wanted to scream, to break, to quit. But then his phone buzzed, a voice message from Lily, her small voice bright and innocent. "Daddy, I love you, you're my hero." That was all he needed. He started the engine and whispered, "I'll never give up. For you." Grace, watching from her car nearby, couldn't hold back her tears anymore. She realized this man wasn't just kind. He was good to his core, even when the world gave him every reason not to be, and that was the moment she made up her mind. It was time to step in. But before David could know who she truly was, before he could understand why this mysterious woman kept crossing his path, something extraordinary was about to happen. 3 days later, David was sitting outside Lily's school, his hands buried in his face, exhaustion etched across every line of his body. The eviction notice sat on the passenger seat, wrinkled and wet from tears he refused to admit were his. He had just finished his last shift at the repair shop. His boss had cut his hours because business was slow, and that meant even less income. He didn't know what to do next. Lily ran out of the school gate, her tiny backpack bouncing behind her. "Daddy," she shouted, running toward him. Her smile melted his worries. For a moment, he lifted her, hugging her tightly, breathing in the only reason he kept going. As they started walking toward his car, a sleek black luxury car pulled up quietly behind them. The window rolled down, and there she was, Grace. David blinked in surprise. "You," she smiled softly. "Do you have a moment?" They sat together at a nearby cafe, a small, quiet place with the faint aroma of coffee and rain. Lily sat beside her father, drawing on a napkin while the two adults talked. Grace looked at him carefully. "David, I owe you an apology. The night you helped me, you didn't know who I was, and I didn't tell you because I wanted to see something the world rarely shows me anymore. Honesty without a price." David frowned slightly, unsure what she meant. She took a deep breath. "My name is Grace Thompson. I own Thompson Motors." David's eyes widened. He'd seen her face on magazines in the waiting room at work. "What, you're the Grace Thompson?" She nodded. "Yes. And ever since that night, I couldn't stop thinking about what you did. You didn't take my money. You didn't even ask for my name. You just helped. People don't do that anymore." David shifted awkwardly. "I didn't do anything special. You needed help. That's all." Grace smiled faintly. "You did something most people wouldn't. You reminded me that humanity still exists." She reached into her bag and placed a sealed envelope on the table. "I've been looking into your situation," she said gently. "I know about your jobs, your rent, your struggles. I hope you don't take offense. I just wanted to understand the man who helped me." David hesitated. "I don't know what to say." "Then don't say anything yet," Grace said kindly. "Just open it." Inside the envelope was a letter and a check, but this wasn't just money. It was a job offer too. A stable position at Thompson Motors, with benefits, housing support, and a full scholarship for Lily's education through a foundation Grace personally funded. David stared at the papers, his vision blurring as he tried to process it. "I can't accept this," he said, voice trembling. "It's too much." Grace leaned forward, her tone soft but firm. "David, listen to me. You gave me something that night money couldn't buy. Faith in people. This isn't charity, it's gratitude." Lily looked up, clutching her father's hand. "Daddy, is this lady your friend?" Grace smiled warmly. "Yes, sweetheart, I'd like to be." For the first time in years, David felt something he had almost forgotten. Hope, not the desperate kind that fades with each sunrise, but the kind that heals. The kind that makes you believe life can still surprise you. He looked at Grace, his voice breaking. "Why me?" "Because," she said simply, "you were kind when you had nothing to give. That's the rarest kind of wealth there is." At that moment, David realized the stranger he had once helped on a rainy night wasn't just a memory from his past. She was the beginning of a future he never thought he'd have. The next few weeks felt like waking up from a long, painful dream. For the first time in years, David didn't have to juggle 2 jobs or worry about where the next meal would come from. He now worked full-time at Thompson Motors, under Grace's supervision, not out of pity, but because of his skill, honesty, and heart. The company staff quickly grew fond of him. He wasn't the loudest man in the room, but his sincerity made everyone respect him. He arrived early, stayed late, and treated every car like it belonged to someone who mattered. Because to him, it did. Grace often visited the workshop, quietly observing. She saw how the same kindness that once saved her on a rainy night now uplifted everyone around him. David wasn't just fixing cars. He was fixing spirits. Meanwhile, Lily's laughter filled their new home, a modest but warm place provided through the company's housing support program. She had her own room now, her own desk, and every night she'd draw pictures for her dad to pin on the wall. One afternoon, Grace visited them with a small box wrapped in blue paper. "This," she said, handing it to Lily, "is for you." Inside was a tiny silver locket. When Lily opened it, she gasped. On one side was a picture of her and her dad, on the other, the words engraved in graceful script, "Kindness creates miracles." David's eyes filled with tears. "Grace, you didn't have to." She interrupted softly. "No, David. You're the reason this foundation exists now. I named it after your daughter, the Lily Hope Foundation. It'll help struggling single parents who just need a chance, like you once did." He couldn't speak. He just stood there looking at her. The woman he once saw as a stranger in the rain, now a friend, a blessing, a light that changed everything. Years passed. David rose through the company ranks, becoming one of its lead supervisors. Lily grew up strong and smart, earning scholarships through the very foundation that bore her name. And every year, on the anniversary of that stormy night, David and Grace would meet, not as CEO and employee, not as rescuer and saved, but as two souls forever connected by a single act of kindness. On one such evening, as they watched the sunset from the workshop rooftop, Grace said quietly, "You know, that night I thought you saved my car. But what you really saved was my heart." David smiled gently. "And you saved my life." They stood there in silence, the golden light washing over them. A reminder that sometimes the smallest gesture, a simple choice to stop and help, can create ripples that reach far beyond what we can see. Because kindness always finds its way back. In the end, David's story wasn't just about a poor single father or a wealthy stranger. It was about the invisible threads of humanity that connect us all. Threads that appear when we least expect them, in the simplest acts of kindness. That rainy night, when David stopped to help a stranded woman, he had no idea he was rewriting his own destiny. He didn't ask for a reward. He didn't expect recognition. He simply did what his heart told him was right. And life, in its quiet, miraculous way, returned that kindness 100-fold. Grace found in David what money could never buy: faith in goodness, purity in struggle, and hope in humanity. David found in Grace what he had long prayed for: a chance, a new beginning, and a reminder that kindness never goes unnoticed. Together, their lives became proof that one selfless act can echo forever, changing hearts, shaping futures, and creating miracles in the most unexpected places. So remember, no act of kindness is ever wasted. You never know whose life you might touch, and sometimes, when you help a stranger, you're actually helping your own destiny find its way back to you.